Okay, so last class we started filling out our unit circle, and we talked about our special right triangles and what would happen if the hypotenuse was 1, and we came up with these values. So what we're going to do is trying to fill in our unit circle. So since this distance we talked about is 1, then the coordinates here must be 1, 0. And then we talked about 30 degrees. If I were to draw in a right triangle, we would have 30 right here, which would make 60 up here. And since this is the unit circle, I know that hypotenuse is 1. Based on the math that we did up here for a 30, 60, 90 triangle, across with the hypotenuse of 1, across from 30 will always be 1/2, across from 60, √3/2. So that's what I'm going to set up down here. Across from 30, 1/2, across from 60, √3/2. And since you are going in the x direction, √3/2, that will be your x part of your coordinate point. And since you are going up 1/2, that would be the y. Okay. So that would be the ordered pair for 30 degrees on the unit circle. The next one we're going to look at is 45. So if this were 45 degrees, this part would be 45, and this would be 1 again. So for a 45, 45, 90 on the unit circle, we talked about how both of those sides would be √2/2. So that would make this ordered pair √2/2. And then I had you guys do 60 and 90. With 60, you guys noticed that it's similar to the 30, just switched. And for 90, just 1 unit up would be 0, 1. So this is what the first quadrant would look like on the unit circle, and the ordered pairs that go along with 30, 45, and 60. Next, what we're going to do is look at the other side, and we're going to start with 150. Now, if I were to draw in a triangle for 150, I would draw it into the closest x-axis. So remember, the angle formed from the terminal side with the closest x-axis is called a reference angle. Okay? And if this was 150 and this piece is 180, that means that this reference angle has to be 30. Okay? Then that also gives me a 30, 60, 90 triangle. Very similar to the other side. Across from the 30, I would have 1/2. Across from the 60, I would have √3/2. But the only difference here is that this is going, starting at the origin and going to the left, this would be the negative x direction. So when I go to write my ordered pair, I would have a negative √3/2 and positive 1/2. So in this quadrant, anything in the second quadrant, the x values are positive, the x values are negative, and the y values are positive. If you also just want to write it as negative and a plus, that's fine. Just to remind us, when we were in the first quadrant, both were positive. So we're going to go ahead and finish up our second quadrant. 135, if you were to draw that in, the reference angle would be 45. So that's actually going to be the same as this, except we're going to have a negative x value. So negative √2/2, √2/2. And 120 would have a reference angle of 60. So we're going to have, instead of positive 1/2, negative 1/2, √3/2. So any angle on the unit circle will either have a reference angle of 30, 45, and 60. So we'll have the same coordinates except a different sign, possibly for x and y. So when we come down here to the third quadrant, we know that both x and y are negative. So I'm going to go ahead and fill that in. 210, if you were to draw, 210 would have a reference angle of 30. So we're going with these coordinates, except both are negative. So negative √3/2, negative 1/2. 225 would have a reference angle of 45, so root 2 over 2, root 2 over 2, both negative. 240 would have a reference angle of 60, so negative 1/2, negative root 3 over 2. And then our last quadrant, we would have a positive x value and a negative y value. So if I start over here at 330, that would have a reference angle, again, of 30. So that means I'm looking at this ordered pair right here. Root 3 over 2 would still be positive, and we would have a negative 1/2. 315 would have a reference angle of 45, so we would have positive root 2 over 2, negative root 2 over 2, and lastly 300 would have a reference angle of 60, so positive 1/2, negative root 3 over 2. And lastly, I forgot to do 180 and 270. 1 unit in this direction would make the ordered pair negative 1, 0. 1 unit down would be 0, negative 1. So this is where our completed circle looks like. Remember, everything has a reference angle of 30, 45, or 60. Go ahead and move on to the back page. And we are going to talk about the 6 trig functions in terms of the unit circle. So right here is an example of 30 degrees on the unit circle. Okay. Across from 30, we have a y value. Across from the 60, we would have an x value. So if we think about sine of 30 degrees, or really any angle, not necessarily just 30, we're just going to use 30 as an example. Remember that sine is opposite over hypotenuse. Okay? So if we look back at our triangle, opposite 30 would actually be y. That is opposite of our 30. So this is the same thing as y, and our hypotenuse on the unit circle will always be 1. So sine of any angle is actually just going to be whatever that y coordinate is. Okay. When we look at cosine, that was a over h. And in this example, our adjacent would be x, and our hypotenuse is still 1. So cosine is actually going to be whatever the x part of your coordinate is. Lastly, tangent, remember TOA would be O over A. So in this case, opposite we have y, and adjacent we have x. So this would be y over x. Let's see what this would look like. So let's look at an example for tangent. Now in our 30, 60, 90 triangle on the unit circle, we know across from the 30 we would have 1/2, so that would be y. And across from the 60 we would have root 3 over 2, so that would be x. So when we look at tangent here, if I were to ask you to figure out what tangent of 30 degrees is, we would plug in 1/2 for y and root 3 over 2 for x. That would give me, so tan of 30 would be 1/2 over root 3 over 2. Okay, and we know we can't leave it like this. We have to simplify. So remember to multiply by the reciprocal would make it 2 over root 3. These 2's would cancel, and you have 1 over root 3. Remember to always rationalize. We talked about this last class. So tangent of 30 degrees would be root 3 over 3. That would be tangent of 30 degrees. We're going to do a few more of these, and then you guys will finish up. But before we do, I want you guys to write down all 6 trig functions in terms of the unit circle. So on the unit circle, okay, whenever we ask about sine of any angle, so remember we talked about you could represent any angle with theta. So sine of any angle will always be the y part of the ordered pair. Cosine of any angle will always be x. Tangent of any angle will always be y over x. So that's what we just talked about over here. Let's do the other three. Cosecant, remember, is the reciprocal of sine. So that would be 1 over y. Secant is the reciprocal of cosine, so 1 over x. And cotangent, the reciprocal of tangent, which is x over y. So here's an example, or here is what the filled in unit circle looks like. So if you tried to do the one on the other page on your own, double check it with these values. But I want to start, I'm going to do these first three problems with you to at least get you started. So to start out with, cosine of 90. Here we have 90 degrees up here. And we have our ordered pair, 0, 1. Up here, we talked about how cosine is the x value, okay? So cosine is our x value. So looking at 90 degrees, the x value of that ordered pair is 0. So when I'm asking about cosine, I'm just looking for the x value, which is 0. Next, we're going to look at sine of 45. So if you guys remember up here, sine of any angle is the y part of the coordinate. So looking here, 45 degrees, I'm going to look at the y part of the ordered pair, and that would just be root 2 over 2. Okay. Next, we're going to do this tangent one, and I'm going to let you guys finish the rest on your own. So tangent of 30, if you guys remember, tangent of 30 is y over x. So if we look at 30 degrees, the y is 1/2, and the x is root 3 over 2. And we're going to rewrite that in multiplication. And we did this math actually above in that box. And we got our final answer of root 3 over 3. So if there's work that needs to be done, especially in terms of simplifying, make sure that you show all of your work on there. And I want you guys to go ahead and try to do the rest of these that are on this page. Once you finish, check your answer key. It will be on my desk. Make sure that you guys are able to do this. You don't need your calculator at this point. Just use your unit circle.